It was just after 8 on a mild April morning in 1995. The retired farmer's widow moved through her kitchen with the same steady rhythm she had followed for years. She poured herself a second cup, buttered a single slice of toast, and turned the radio dial until the morning news came in clear. The announcer's voice filled the quiet house as she slipped on her worn jacket and stepped outside to check the mailbox at the end of the gravel drive. The air was still, heavy with spring humidity. Her boots pressed faint marks into the damp earth as she walked past the garden fence. She had planned to spend the rest of the morning tending to her tomatoes, but she never made it back. By noon, the radio was still playing inside the empty house. The coffee had cooled. The kitchen chair sat slightly pushed back, as if she had left in a hurry. When her neighbor, Alma Jenkins, drove by, she noticed Diana's pickup still parked by the porch. That truck rarely sat idle past mid-morning. Alma called out toward the open back door, but no one answered. Hours passed. By late afternoon, word spread that Diana was missing. Neighbors began to search the nearby fields and creek bed, calling her name as the sun dropped behind the trees. Flashlights flickered through the tall grass. Then, just before dusk, the mail carrier spotted something along the gravel road. A brown leather purse lying face down in the dust. Inside were Diana's reading glasses, her checkbook, and her house keys. The road was empty, silent except for the wind pushing through the pines. Diana Holt had vanished without a sound, leaving behind a half-finished cup of coffee and a mystery that would haunt Boone County for decades. Diana Holt was not the kind of woman people forgot. She was born in 1935 on a stretch of farmland outside Harrison, Arkansas. One of 5 children raised in a modest wooden house where the days began before sunrise and ended only when the work was done. Her father grew corn and soybeans. Her mother ran the home with quiet discipline. From an early age, Diana learned that survival in Boone County meant resilience, not sentiment. By the time she turned 20, Diana was already known for her strong will. She met Roy Holt, a quiet farmer from a neighboring town, at a county fair in 1955. The two married within the year. Their life was steady, simple, and built around the land. They worked side by side, tending cattle, repairing fences, and selling feed at the co-op every spring. Those who knew them said the Holts never had much, but they had enough, and they had pride. Neighbors described Diana as direct to a fault. She spoke plainly, never softened her words, and believed that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, was a form of respect. Some admired that honesty, others avoided it. She was the type who noticed everything and forgot nothing. Over the years, people learned that if Diana saw you cutting corners, she would call you out before the dust settled. When Roy died suddenly of a heart attack in 1989, the community expected Diana to sell the land and move closer to family. She did not. She stayed. She kept working the fields with hired hands and managed the small farm by herself. Her house sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by acres of pasture and quiet isolation. She fed her chickens before dawn, drove into town once a week for supplies, and paid every bill in person at the post office. People said she was tough, but not unkind. When a neighbor's fence broke, she helped mend it. When a young family lost a crop to flooding, she brought them sacks of cornmeal from her own shed. Still, she did not tolerate disrespect. Those who worked for her knew that Diana expected the job done right, and the truth told straight. Friends from church remembered her sitting in the same pew every Sunday, a folded handkerchief in her lap, her silver hair pinned neatly back. She never missed a service, even in the hardest years. Afterwards, she would stop by the diner, drink black coffee, and listen more than she spoke. She had a reputation for remembering details others forgot. A date, a debt, or a promise someone once made. That memory earned her respect, but it also earned her enemies. By the mid-1990s, Diana's life had settled into quiet routine. She rarely traveled. She kept to her property, maintaining the garden Roy had planted decades earlier. Yet beneath that ordinary rhythm were small tensions no one noticed until it was too late. In the weeks before her disappearance, neighbors recalled seeing a stranger's truck parked near her gate. Diana mentioned to a friend that she had been arguing with a former farmhand about unpaid wages. She said the man had grown pushy and that she had told him to stay off her land. When police began piecing together her final days, that detail stood out. Among her careful routines and quiet independence, a single confrontation had broken through the calm. Investigators soon learned the man she had argued with was Earl "Red" Jennings, a name that would echo through the case for decades to come. When the first call reached the Boone County Sheriff's Office, it sounded like a simple welfare check. A neighbor could not reach Diana Holt. Her truck was still in the driveway, the back door stood open, and no one had seen her since morning. Deputies arrived just before sunset on April 12, 1995. The farmhouse sat quiet at the end of the gravel road, the radio inside still playing low. A pot of coffee had gone cold on the stove. The chair at the kitchen table was slightly turned, as if someone had risen quickly. Her house keys lay beside the counter, next to a half-open envelope addressed to the electric company. Nothing appeared stolen, and there were no signs of forced entry. Outside, the yard told a different story. Near the porch steps, one muddy footprint broke the clean pattern of the soil. It faced toward the field, not the house. Investigators marked it with a yellow flag and took photographs under the fading light. Close by, a scuff mark trailed through the dirt, ending where the grass began. To trained eyes, it looked like someone had been dragged. The search began within the hour. Local volunteers joined deputies as night fell, combing through tall grass with flashlights. They called her name, their voices carrying over the quiet fields. The county's search and rescue unit deployed dogs. But the scent was faint, fading near the old fence line. At dawn, the search expanded toward the creek bed 2 miles south of Diana's property. The terrain was rough, with steep ditches and overgrown brush. Around mid-morning, a volunteer spotted something near the water, a scrap of fabric snagged on a branch. Moments later, they saw her. Diana Holt lay face down at the edge of the creek. Her jacket was torn, her hands scraped, and the ground around her showed signs of struggle. Paramedics confirmed she had been dead for several hours. The discovery site was immediately sealed off as a crime scene. Detectives Mark Ellison and Carla Reeves, both seasoned investigators, arrived to oversee the process. Photographs captured every inch of the area. The position of her body, the soil beneath her nails, the broken twigs, the partial shoe print in the mud. A county coroner documented visible injuries, bruising around the arms, deep cuts on her palms, and a single blow to the head consistent with blunt force trauma. No weapon was found nearby. Her watch was missing, as was the chain she often wore. But her purse, discovered the previous evening near the road, ruled out robbery as the main motive. Nothing else pointed to a burglary gone wrong. The evidence suggested confrontation, sudden, brief, and violent. Back at the house, the investigation deepened. Crime scene technicians dusted for fingerprints, collecting partial prints from the back door handle and the counter. They bagged the coffee mug, a napkin, and a newspaper folded to the weather page. The open envelope contained a small check, unsigned, with a handwritten note reminding herself to mail Monday. Everything about the home suggested normalcy, a day interrupted mid-routine. Detectives Ellison and Reeves compared the scene to Diana's known habits. Friends told them she was careful. She locked her doors, rarely invited anyone inside, and always kept her truck keys close. The keys left behind raised an immediate question. Why would she step outside without them? The answer, they suspected, was that she never planned to go far. Forensic teams searched the nearby ditch where tire marks hinted that a vehicle had stopped briefly. The tracks were too faint for identification, but one detail stood out. The tread pattern was from a pickup, possibly an older model with worn rear tires. Witnesses later recalled seeing a blue truck in the area earlier that morning. Over the next 24 hours, the investigation turned from a missing person to a homicide. Reporters gathered outside the sheriff's office as deputies carried sealed evidence bags into the lab. The town had not seen a murder in nearly a decade, and the community's unease was immediate. At the morgue, the autopsy confirmed what investigators already feared. Diana Holt had suffered a single fatal strike to the head with a blunt object, possibly a tool or heavy stick. Defensive wounds covered her forearms. There were no signs of sexual assault. The medical examiner estimated the time of death between 8 and 10 in the morning, shortly after she had been seen alive. The timeline grew clearer. Diana left her house around 8 to check the mail, encountered someone near the drive, and was attacked before reaching the road. The killer likely dragged her body to a vehicle and transported her to the creek bed before abandoning her there. The precision and speed of the assault suggested familiarity, not random violence, but something personal. Detectives reviewed her recent history, searching for anyone who might have reason to harm her. They noted a small list of names, former workers, neighbors, distant relatives, and began cross-checking alibis. But before any suspect could be named, one final piece of evidence shifted the tone of the case. When the coroner examined her hands, he noticed her right fist was tightly clenched. Inside it, partially buried beneath dried mud, was a fragment of cloth. Under the harsh light of the examination room, the fibers revealed a distinct pattern, red and grey plaid, torn from something larger. It was the only physical clue Diana Holt had managed to leave behind, and whoever it belonged to would become the center of the investigation that was only just beginning. Detectives Mark Ellison and Carla Reeves began their investigation within hours of the discovery. Both were seasoned officers, calm under pressure and known for their precision. Ellison had served the Boone County Sheriff's Office for more than 20 years, while Reeves, younger but methodical, was gaining a reputation for her attention to small inconsistencies others overlooked. Together, they took control of the Holt case with a single goal: find whoever had taken the life of one of Boone County's most familiar faces. Their first step was to reconstruct Diana's final hours. Witness statements placed her alive around 8 in the morning, seen walking toward her mailbox. The mail carrier confirmed she had delivered post at 8:10 a.m. but did not see Diana herself. By noon, her neighbor noticed the door open. The estimated window of the crime was narrow, a span of less than 2 hours. The detectives began interviewing everyone connected to Diana's daily life. They spoke to neighbors, church members, and the small circle of workers who had helped maintain her farm over the years. Among the names that surfaced, one stood out almost immediately: Earl "Red" Jennings. Jennings was a drifter in his early 30s, known for short tempers and shorter jobs. He had worked for Diana the previous summer repairing fences and clearing brush, but was dismissed after a heated argument over pay. Locals described him as quick to anger, especially when drinking. He had a record of minor offenses, disorderly conduct, trespassing, unpaid fines, but nothing violent. Still, something about him drew the detectives' attention. When Ellison and Reeves located Jennings, he was staying at a rundown motel just outside Harrison. He appeared calm, almost casual when they questioned him. He admitted working for Diana months earlier, but claimed he had not seen her since. He said their disagreement had been about wages, nothing more. He offered his alibi easily. He had spent the morning of April 12th helping a friend move furniture in a nearby town. Detectives noted his tone, steady, almost rehearsed, and his reluctance to meet their eyes when Diana's name was mentioned. They asked about his truck, a blue pickup with fading paint and a dented fender, matching the partial description given by witnesses who had seen a vehicle near Diana's property that morning. Jennings said he had sold it weeks earlier, providing a handwritten bill of sale that listed only a first name, Tommy. To verify his story, investigators checked with the friend he claimed to have helped. The man confirmed the alibi but admitted he had not been with Jennings the entire morning. The timeline left enough of a gap for suspicion to linger. While Jennings remained under watch, detectives cast a wider net. Rumors began circulating in town. Some said Diana kept cash hidden in her home. Others whispered about a box of old coins her late husband had collected. Word spread quickly that robbery might have been the motive. Ellison, skeptical but thorough, ordered a second search of the property. No hidden money was found, and nothing inside the home appeared disturbed. Forensic results trickled in slowly. The fragment of plaid fabric found in Diana's hand contained no clear fingerprints and limited DNA material, insufficient for identification with 1995 technology. The footprint near the porch matched a standard work boot, a common brand sold across Arkansas. The tire marks near the ditch provided no distinct tread pattern. Each piece of evidence seemed to raise more questions than answers. Reeves focused on Diana's missing items, her wristwatch, and the small silver chain she wore daily. Both had sentimental value, and she rarely removed them. Detectives began checking local pawn shops, showing photos to owners in Boone and neighboring counties. Several leads came in but led nowhere. The watch never surfaced. As days turned into weeks, pressure mounted. The case dominated local headlines. Community meetings filled with speculation, and every unfamiliar face drew suspicion. Ellison and Reeves continued interviewing former employees, including a retired handyman, a distant relative who had borrowed money from Diana, and a farm supplier who had argued with her over a delivery bill. Each was questioned, tested, and cleared. To narrow possibilities, Ellison requested polygraph tests for several key individuals. Jennings agreed to take one. The test lasted nearly 2 hours under controlled conditions. When the results returned, he passed. No significant signs of deception were recorded. The outcome frustrated investigators. They still believed Jennings knew more than he admitted, but the lack of physical evidence left them no grounds for arrest. Days later, Jennings left town. He checked out of the motel without notice, leaving behind an unpaid tab and a few personal belongings. When deputies tracked him, he had already crossed state lines heading west toward Oklahoma. With no active warrant, they could not pursue him further. The investigation began to stall. Leads dried up, and the once busy command post inside the sheriff's office grew quiet. Reeves spent long hours reviewing photographs of the scene, hoping to find something overlooked. Ellison attended briefings, his tone increasingly weary. Despite the frustration, the detectives refused to close the case. They kept detailed logs of every call, every tip, and every minor observation. They knew from experience that unsolved murders in small towns did not fade easily. They lingered, resurfacing when least expected. One evening, as Reeves reviewed interviews from the early days of the search, a deputy knocked on her office door. He carried a notepad, his expression cautious. A new witness had come forward, an elderly man who lived half a mile from the Holt property. He claimed he had been driving into town the morning Diana disappeared. As he passed her road, he saw a blue pickup truck idling near her front gate. The driver's face was partly hidden by the sun visor, but the vehicle, he said, looked familiar. The detail reignited the investigation. The blue pickup, the same description Jennings had given away in his alibi, was back at the center of suspicion. And for Detectives Ellison and Reeves, that single sighting would become the thread that kept the case alive, long after everyone else had started to forget. Boone County had seen its share of hardships, storms, floods, and farm losses, but not murder. The killing of Diana Holt sent a shock through the quiet Arkansas Valley that words could barely hold. In the first days after her body was found, fear spread faster than facts. Porch lights stayed on through the night. People began double-locking their doors, even in daylight. At the diner in town, conversations fell silent whenever her name came up. Everyone had a theory, but no one had answers. Churches held candlelight vigils, their pews filled with farmers, shopkeepers, and families who had known Diana all their lives. Pastor Harold Green opened each service with a brief prayer for justice, his voice low, his words deliberate. Across the aisle, Diana's niece, Lisa Warner, sat in the front row, her hands folded tightly, her expression unreadable. She was the only living relative still close to Boone County and soon became the family's public voice. When reporters arrived from Little Rock, Lisa stood outside the sheriff's office and spoke calmly into the microphones. She thanked the deputies for their work, asked for privacy, and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. Her composure drew quiet respect, not dramatic, not emotional, just steady. People said she looked exactly like Diana when she was younger. Same eyes, same unshakable posture. In homes and feed stores, whispers filled the air. Some said the murder had to be the work of a stranger, maybe one of the drifters who camped near the county line. Others disagreed, claiming it felt personal, a grudge, a debt, an old argument finally settled in violence. Theories divided the town. A few pointed fingers toward past disputes over land boundaries, muttering that Diana had enemies closer than anyone realized. Detectives Ellison and Reeves kept a careful distance from the speculation. They knew how rumors twisted facts, but they also understood that in a small town, every whisper carried a piece of truth hidden somewhere within it. They continued quiet. Interviews, knocking on doors, revisiting witnesses, while reporters searched for new headlines to fill the void. Time did not ease the unease. The following Sunday, Diana's usual pew sat empty, a single white rose resting where she once sat. Neighbors left flowers by her gate, their colors already fading in the heat. On her porch, a family friend covered, the light with black cloth, a simple symbol of mourning used by old farm families for generations. Weeks turned into months. The initial noise of the case softened, replaced by quiet waiting. Boone County returned to its routines, but something had changed in its rhythm. Where trust once lived, caution now settled. Then, one morning, as the sheriff's office sorted mail from the public tip line, an envelope appeared with no return address. The handwriting was rough, the paper folded twice. Inside was a single sentence written in blue ink. "I know who did it." No name, no signature, no explanation. Detectives Ellison and Reeves stared at the note in silence, realizing that the calm Boone County had forced itself to believe in was about to break all over again. The anonymous letter arrived like a promise, but it gave nothing. Detectives Ellison and Reeves studied every inch of it, the handwriting, the paper, the ink. Forensic analysts compared the writing to known samples from Diana's acquaintances, but there was no match. The envelope bore no fingerprints, no traceable postage, and had been dropped directly into the sheriff's office mailbox after hours. The message, only 5 words long, "I know who did it," led to weeks of wasted motion. Deputies followed. False tips, interviewed old neighbors, and reopened files, but no new evidence surfaced. Whoever sent it had either lost their courage or wanted only to stir the waters. In the months that followed, the investigation expanded and then fractured under the weight of speculation. Several new names entered the file. An ex-tenant who once rented a small trailer on Diana's land came under scrutiny after boasting in a bar that he knew more than he should. When questioned, he claimed he had been trying to impress friends. His alibi checked out, and he was cleared. Next came a traveling salesman who had passed through Boone County the week before the murder. He had sold farm equipment door to door, including to properties near Diana's. Witnesses placed him miles away on the day she vanished, but his presence fueled rumors of an outsider's crime. Detectives tracked him down in Oklahoma City. After hours of questioning, his receipts and route log proved his innocence. Even within the family, questions arose. A distant cousin, briefly mentioned in Diana's will, became the focus of attention when investigators discovered he had fallen into financial trouble. Reeves interviewed him in his home, taking careful notes as he described his last visit to Diana, more than a year earlier. No evidence tied him to her death. He broke down halfway through the interview, saying, "Everyone thinks I wanted her land. I only wanted her respect." Reeves left the house with no reason to doubt him. For every lead that appeared, 2 more dissolved. Evidence technicians re-examined the plaid fabric found in Diana's hand, hoping for progress. Under magnification, the fibers appeared to contain soil residue and faint traces of paint. They sent samples to the state lab in Little Rock. The report came back inconclusive, too little material for comparison. DNA testing in 1995 could not isolate profiles from such small, degraded fragments. Detectives also analyzed mud samples collected near the creek and beneath Diana's porch. The soil types matched general Boone County composition, offering nothing distinctive. Paint chips from the nearby tire marks turned out to be from an old fence post, not a vehicle. Every promising clue ended the same way, in silence. By late 1996, frustration had settled into the rhythm of the case. Files grew thick with reports stamped, "No result." Leads slowed. The press began calling it the Holt mystery, and then, less kindly, the rural puzzle. Newspapers moved on to newer stories: floods, elections, county fairs. What had once consumed every front page now appeared only in occasional retrospectives, a brief reminder of an unsolved crime that seemed frozen in time. Inside the sheriff's office, Ellison continued to push. He kept the case file on his desk long after others would have stored it away. Reeves watched him work late, handwriting notes that filled entire notebooks with small observations: footprints, shoe sizes, distances, inconsistencies. He believed that one day, something small would break the silence. But small towns change slowly, and evidence changes faster than memory. Without technology to match fibers or DNA, every path led to the same wall. The detectives knew they were losing ground. In 1998, after 25 years in law enforcement, Mark Ellison turned in his badge. His desk was cleared except for one item: a single photograph of Diana Holt taken at a church picnic years earlier, her smile faint but steady. Before leaving, he placed it inside the case file and closed the folder carefully. He told Reeves quietly, "This one will not stay buried forever." Then he walked out of the Boone County Sheriff's Office for the last time. The unsolved case of Diana Holt still open on the shelf behind him, waiting for a future that might finally bring the truth. The years that followed were silent. The case of Diana Holt faded from headlines first, then from conversation, and finally from memory. The Boone County Sheriff's Office moved on to new crimes, new files, new names. Somewhere among the shelves of the evidence room, the cardboard box marked Holt, D, gathered a layer of fine gray dust. Inside it, the pieces of her story waited: sealed bags, faded photographs, and one torn scrap of plaid fabric that no one had been able to explain. Outside, the world changed. The county grew quieter. New houses rose where old barns once stood. The gravel road leading to Diana's farmhouse was repaved, but her gate remained as it had been in 1995, rusted, half-leaning, and always closed. Her property was sold off in parcels, though neighbors still referred to it as the Holt place, as if her presence lingered somewhere beyond the tall grass. Detective Mark Ellison, now retired, never stopped thinking about it. He visited the sheriff's office a few times each year, checking in with younger deputies who barely remembered the case. Most only knew it as a line in an old logbook, a rural homicide, unsolved. The younger officers listened politely as Ellison described the evidence, the footprint, the plaid cloth, the half-finished coffee cup. But time had dulled the urgency. They nodded, promised to take another look, and returned to their current cases. At home, Ellison kept a small box of his own. Inside it lay copies of photographs, his personal notes, and the one picture of Diana he had taken from the original file years earlier. It showed her at a church picnic, standing beside her husband's old pickup, her expression calm and slightly amused. He pinned that photo above his desk in his study. It stayed there through every season, through his retirement, through his wife's illness, through the years when he stopped wearing a badge but could not let go of the past. Every few months, Lisa Warner would call. Her voice remained steady, but the words rarely changed. "Anything new, Mark?" she would ask. There never was. She visited once in person, around 2006. They sat on Ellison's porch, the cicadas droning in the humid air. She spoke about how the farmhouse still stood empty, how she could not bring herself to sell the last few acres of land. Ellison told her he still believed the case could be solved, that one day someone would make a mistake, and the truth would surface. She smiled faintly, as if she wanted to believe him. Years turned into decades. By 2010, the community barely spoke of the murder. Younger residents knew the name only from local rumor, the story of the woman who vanished one April morning and was found near the creek. A new generation moved through Boone County, and for them, the Holt case was just an old ghost story. Season after season, time wore down what little evidence remained. Paper labels faded, photographs yellowed. The scent of dust and storage filled the evidence room. Files were boxed, logged, and stored on metal shelves that lined the concrete walls, like rows of forgotten lives.
In 2015, the sheriff's office officially marked the case as dormant.
It was not closed, just frozen. No new leads, no active investigation, no hope of progress. The formality felt like a final silence settling over Diana Holt's name. Ellison read about the decision in the local paper. He folded the article neatly and placed it inside his notebook. He had grown older, slower, but his memory of that spring morning in 1995 never dimmed. Sometimes, when he drove past the old Holt property, he would stop by the gate and look out over the empty field. The house still stood, its windows boarded, its porch sagging. The radio that once played softly in the kitchen had long since gone silent. The county had forgotten. But he had not. For him, the unsolved case was not just about evidence or suspects. It was about a promise, one he had made to himself, and to the woman whose life had been taken without reason. Then, in 2022, 27 years after the murder, the quiet broke. Boone County announced the creation of a new cold case unit, a small team funded through a state grant to review unsolved homicides. The news barely made the local paper, tucked beneath a headline about road repairs. But for Ellison, reading from his worn kitchen table, it felt like the first breath of life in years. Within months, that new team, young detectives, trained in modern forensic methods, began pulling forgotten boxes from the evidence room. They opened cases one by one, laying out old files beneath fluorescent lights, relabeling each with digital barcodes, cataloging what time had left behind. Among those boxes was the one Ellison knew best. On its side, written in fading marker, were the words, Holt, Diana, 1995. When the lid was lifted, the air inside smelled faintly of paper and earth. The contents were small, ordinary, unchanged. But somewhere in that dust, a story waited to be told again, and this time it would not stay silent. The evidence box had waited 27 years for someone to open it again. When the Boone County Cold Case Unit began its work in early 2022, the team's priority was simple: re-examine what older technology had missed. Detective Hannah Cole, one of the newly assigned investigators, lifted each item from the Holt file with careful, gloved hands. There was the torn plaid fabric sealed in plastic, a pair of photographs from the scene, a few small envelopes labeled trace samples, fingernails. The air in the evidence room was still and dry, heavy with the smell of age and paper. Cole studied the fragment, no bigger than a handkerchief. Its colors had faded, but the pattern, dark red and navy intersecting stripes, was still visible. For years, this small piece of cloth had been an unsolved riddle. It was found clenched in Diana Holt's hand, as if she had fought her attacker to the last moment. Now, with modern technology, it could finally speak. The team packaged the sample and sent it to the Arkansas State Crime Laboratory, requesting advanced DNA testing using touch DNA extraction, a process unavailable in 1995. The lab also received the fingernail scrapings collected from Diana's body, the last physical evidence that might still hold a trace of her killer. Weeks passed. The cold case team continued working through other files, but the Holt case stayed at the top of the list. Detective Cole checked the lab portal daily, waiting for updates. For her, this was not just another file. She had grown up in Boone County and remembered the whispered stories about the widow who disappeared one spring morning. Solving it would mean closing a chapter that had haunted her community her entire life. By midsummer, the first report came back. A partial male DNA profile had been recovered from the plaid fabric, a small, degraded sample but viable enough for analysis. It was entered into CODIS, the national DNA database maintained by the FBI. The search took less than a minute. When the match appeared on the screen, the room fell silent. The name was Earl Red Jennings, the same man who had been one of the first suspects in 1995. A drifter. A former hired hand. A man who had left town weeks after Diana's death. At the time, he had passed a polygraph and walked free. For decades, he had been little more than a rumor in old police reports. Now, his DNA was sitting on the very fabric found in Diana Holt's hand. Detective Cole reread the match confirmation twice, then forwarded the result to Lieutenant Reeves, now head of the Cold Case Unit. The same Carla Reeves who had once worked under Detective Ellison nearly 30 years earlier. For her, the match was more than just a lead. It was a ghost returning to life. They sent the evidence back for retesting and verification. The lab repeated the process. Extraction, amplification, cross-reference. The results came back identical. The odds of error were less than 1 in a billion. Jennings's DNA was also found beneath Diana's fingernails. Minute traces, but consistent with defensive contact. 2 separate samples, 2 separate confirmations. It was no longer speculation. It was science. Reeves sat in her office, staring at the lab report under the sterile fluorescent light. The pages felt heavy in her hands. She thought of Ellison, long retired, who had never stopped asking about the case. She knew he would want to hear this from her directly. That evening, she called him. When he answered, his voice carried the slow drawl of age but also alertness, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. "Mark," she said quietly. "We have him." There was silence on the line. Then a single exhale. Jennings had moved across state lines years earlier. According to public records, he was now 64, living under the name Edward Larkin in a small town just outside Springfield, Missouri. He had a clean record, no violent charges since the 90s, no major run-ins with the law. He worked part-time repairing farm equipment and rented a trailer on the edge of town. To his neighbors, he was polite but distant. To the Boone County detectives, he was suddenly the center of everything. The team began building their case methodically. They verified the chain of custody for the 1995 evidence, ensuring that no contamination could challenge the results. They reconstructed the timeline of Jennings's employment under Diana Holt. When he worked for her, when he left, when he returned briefly to collect unpaid wages. Witness interviews from the old file painted a pattern of resentment and temper. Diana had fired him after catching him drinking on the job. He had called her a stubborn old woman. In 1995, those words had seemed meaningless. In 2022, they sounded like motive. Detective Cole pulled phone records, financial documents, and DMV data. They found that Jennings had changed his name legally in 2001 after relocating. He had lived quietly, keeping no close family ties. But beneath that quiet life, his past was still written in the fibers of an old piece of cloth and the scratches beneath a woman's nails. When the final DNA confirmation arrived, Reeves gathered her team in the briefing room. The Holt case file sat open on the table. Every document, every photograph, every unanswered question had led to this moment. "After 27 years," she said, "we have our suspect." The room was still. No applause, no celebration, just the weight of justice finally moving after decades of silence. Reeves closed the folder and signed the warrant request. 2 days later, unmarked cars left the Boone County Sheriff's Office before dawn, heading north toward Missouri. The air was cool, the horizon pale with first light. Inside one of those cars, Detective Cole stared out the window, the old case file resting on her lap. Next to her sat Reeves, silent, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Nearly 3 decades after Diana Holt's death, they were going to find Earl "Red" Jennings, the man who had vanished into obscurity and thought the past had forgotten him. It had not. Detective Carla Reeves had seen hundreds of cases in her 25 years with the Boone County Sheriff's Office, but none held her like this one. Once the DNA results named Earl "Red" Jennings, Reeves could have closed the file and prepared the paperwork for arrest, but something in her resisted the simplicity of that ending. She wanted to see how the story fit together, to prove, piece by piece, that the evidence was not a coincidence. Late nights became routine. The cold case office stayed lit long after everyone else had gone home. Reeves sat surrounded by yellowing files, grainy photos, and old tape recordings. Each document carried the fingerprints of Detective Mark Ellison, her mentor from years before. His handwriting filled the margins, tight. Deliberate notes that spoke of his quiet persistence. She began retracing his path, starting with the small details he had underlined, the muddy footprint near the porch, the missing wristwatch, the torn plaid fabric. These were the things Ellison had always believed would solve the case, if only technology had caught up. Now with Jennings back in the frame, Reeves wanted to confirm every link between the man and that April morning in 1995. She began with the footprint. The original plaster cast was still stored in the evidence vault. Its edges cracked but intact. Reeves had it digitally scanned and enhanced, comparing tread patterns against the shoe databases used by modern forensics. The pattern was distinctive, a heavy lug sole typical of older work boots sold in rural hardware stores during the early 90s. From Jennings's employment record, she learned that his pay had once been garnished to settle an equipment loan. That loan included a pair of Redmond brand work boots, size 11. The manufacturer had long since gone out of business, but their tread design was still archived in forensic databases. The match was unmistakable. The print from Diana Holt's porch aligned perfectly with Jennings's old boot pattern. Every ridge, every worn edge identical. It was the first physical connection between him and the scene. But Reeves was not finished. She turned next to the missing wristwatch. According to the 1995 reports, Diana's niece had told deputies that her aunt wore the same gold watch every day. A modest piece with a cracked crystal and initials engraved on the back, R.H., for her late husband, Roy Holt. The watch had never been found, and investigators once assumed it was taken during the struggle or lost near the creek. Reeves did not believe it had simply disappeared. He dug through pawnshop logs from the spring and summer of 1995, longhand ledgers scanned onto microfilm and nearly forgotten in courthouse storage. Hours turned into days as she scrolled through lines of faint handwriting, names and items blurring together. Then one entry caught her eye. June 12, 1995. Springfield pawn and loan item. Women's gold wristwatch, cracked glass cellar. James Larkin Reeves froze. Jennings's legal name change to Edward Larkin had not occurred until 2001, but Larkin, the same alias, years earlier, could not be a coincidence. She contacted the Missouri Bureau of Investigation and requested access to the pawn shop's old receipts. Within a week, a faded photocopy arrived. The signature was crude, but legible enough, J. Larkin. Next to it, a fingerprint smudge remained, one that modern technology could now analyze. The state lab confirmed what Reeves already suspected. The print belonged to Earl Jennings. The missing watch had resurfaced after 27 years, sold under a false name less than 2 months after Diana's murder. Reeves placed the pawn ticket on her desk beside the photo of the porch footprint and the plaid fabric. Each clue, once isolated and meaningless, now fit into a single line of truth. Jennings had been there. He had struggled with Diana. He had taken the watch as his trophy. Outside, the office windows reflected the cold blue light of dawn. Reeves sat in silence, her pen still in her hand. For a long moment she did not move. She thought of Ellison, of his promise never to forget the case, of the photo he kept pinned above his desk. Now, after all these years, she was holding the final piece he had searched for, and somewhere in Missouri, the man responsible had no idea that the watch, his one mistake, had finally come back to find him. The morning of the arrest began quietly. Detectives Carla Reeves and Hannah Cole arrived in Springfield before sunrise. The air was cool, the streets still damp from overnight rain. They parked half a block away from a small, aging apartment complex on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where no one looked twice at unfamiliar cars, where residents kept to themselves. Earl Red Jennings, now living under the name Edward Larkin, had rented a second-floor unit. According to public records, he had lived there for more than 10 years, working part-time repairing farm machinery and doing odd jobs. His neighbors described him as polite, quiet, always alone. No one knew about the man he used to be. At 6:17 a.m., Reeves and Cole knocked on his door. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. When Jennings answered, he looked older than his 64 years. Gray stubble, deep lines in his face, eyes wary but alert. "Mr. Larkin?" Reeves asked. He nodded slowly. "I am Detective Carla Reeves with the Boone County Sheriff's Office in Arkansas. We would like to ask you a few questions about an ongoing investigation." Jennings hesitated only a moment before opening the door wider. Inside, the apartment was sparse. A small table, a stack of newspapers, a few tools arranged neatly on the counter. On the wall hung a single photograph of a younger Jennings standing beside a pickup truck. Reeves introduced Cole, then explained that they wanted to speak at the Springfield Police Department. Jennings agreed, perhaps believing it was routine. He rode quietly in the back of the unmarked car, his hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the passing streets. Inside the interview room, a digital recorder clicked on. The timestamp read 9:04 a.m. Reeves began the interview with practiced calm. "Mr. Jennings, you once worked for a woman named Diana Holt in Boone County, Arkansas. Do you remember her?" Jennings shook his head. "No. Do not think I ever knew that name." Cole opened a folder, sliding an old photograph across the table. "This is her," she said. "Taken in 1994. You did field work for her that year." Jennings stared at the photograph but said nothing. His hands tightened slightly, then relaxed again. Reeves continued. "You were questioned in 1995 about her death. You left Boone County soon after. We are here today because new forensic evidence has connected you to that crime scene." Still, no reaction. Jennings leaned back in his chair, his voice measured. "I already told police back then I did not know anything about that. I took your test. I passed. I moved on." Reeves's tone remained even. "Technology has changed since then, Mr. Jennings. We have tested the fabric found in Mrs. Holt's hand. Your DNA was on it." Silence filled the room. The low hum of the fluorescent light seemed louder than before. Jennings's expression shifted, a slow, visible tightening in his jaw. Cole spoke next, her voice calm but direct. "Your DNA was also found under her fingernails. That does not happen by accident." Jennings stared at the table. His breathing grew heavier, slower. Seconds passed, long and unbroken. The recorder's small red light blinked steadily. Finally, he spoke. His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. "You really tested that?" "Yes," Reeves said. He nodded once, as if confirming something only he understood. "Then I guess that means it is over." Reeves said nothing. She waited. Jennings leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I went there that morning. I will not lie about that. She owed me money. At least I thought she did. I was angry. I had been drinking." His words came slowly, stripped of emotion, each one landing like a weight. "I told her she never paid me for the last 2 weeks I worked. She said I broke her tools, said I did not earn it." I shouted. She shouted back. Then she pushed me toward the door. He paused, rubbing his hands together. I do not even remember grabbing her arm, but she slipped on the step. She hit her head on the railing. It happened fast. I panicked. The detectives let him continue, their silence drawing out the truth. She was still breathing. I did not mean for it to go that far, but when I saw the blood, I lost it. I dragged her toward the truck. I thought she might wake up, thought I could drive her somewhere. But she stopped moving. I carried her to the creek, left her there. The hum of the recorder filled the room again. Reeves asked softly, "Why did you take her watch?" Jennings looked down at his hands. "I do not know. Maybe to make it look like a robbery, maybe to keep something. I pawned it in Springfield a few weeks later. Needed the cash." He looked up finally, meeting Reeves's eyes for the first time. "I never planned it. I swear I did not." Reeves studied him, her expression steady. "You left her to die alone," she said. Jennings did not reply. After a long pause, he whispered, "I know." The recorder clicked as Reeves ended the session. Jennings sat back in silence, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on nothing. The air in the room felt heavy, still, almost reverent. Outside, officers prepared the paperwork for extradition. The official charge would be second-degree murder, based on his confession and the forensic evidence. Reeves stepped into the hallway, closing the interview room door behind her. She leaned against the wall for a moment, the weight of 27 years pressing against her chest. Detective Cole stood beside her, speechless. For a long time, neither said a word. Then Reeves took out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she had been waiting to call. When Lisa Warner answered, her voice was quiet, cautious, as if she already knew what was coming. Reeves spoke 3 simple words, the only ones that mattered after nearly 3 decades of silence. "We got him." The news traveled through Boone County faster than anyone expected. For nearly 3 decades, the name Earl "Red" Jennings had been a fading memory, a drifter who left town after the murder and never returned. But now, his face was back on every local newscast, his mugshot beside headlines that read, 1995 cold case solved, arrest in Diana Holt murder. For the older residents, it felt impossible. Many remembered Jennings from years ago when he still worked odd jobs around town. Some recalled his easy grin at the county fair, others the way he helped set up tents for church fundraisers. To them, he was just another familiar face from a long, quiet past, not the man who had left Diana Holt dying beside a creek. The shock settled like a shadow across the county. People spoke softly about it in grocery aisles and after Sunday services, trying to reconcile the man they once knew with the confession broadcast on television. Some felt relief, others disbelief. A few whispered that justice, though late, had finally come home. In Springfield, Jennings was extradited to Arkansas within a week. The trial began in Boone County Circuit Court that November. It was not a spectacle. There were no television crews inside, no grand speeches, no crowded galleries. Just the quiet rhythm of legal procedure and the heavy presence of time. Jennings entered the courtroom in a plain suit, thinner than before, his hair cropped short. He rarely looked up. At the defense table, he sat motionless, his hands folded neatly in front of him. Across the aisle, Detective Carla Reeves took her seat as the prosecution's lead witness. Her testimony was measured, professional. She described the reopening of the case, the forensic analysis, the DNA confirmation, the recovered pawn receipt, and the confession. Every word was deliberate, each detail placed precisely where it belonged. When she mentioned the plaid fabric and the fingernail scrapings, the courtroom fell completely silent. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. Next came Mark Ellison, now in his late 60s. He walked slowly to the stand, carrying the weight of years in his step. He testified about the early investigation, the footprint near the porch, the missing watch, the frustration of a case that had gone cold. His voice trembled slightly when he described reopening those memories, but his words were steady. "I never forgot her," he said quietly. "I promised I would not." The defense offered little argument. Jennings' attorney cited his age, his cooperation, and the claim that the death had not been premeditated. But the facts stood unshaken. The DNA, the watch, the confession. The jury listened without emotion, their expressions fixed and solemn. When closing arguments ended, the courtroom waited. Hours passed, then the jury returned. The foreman rose, holding the verdict slip in both hands. Guilty of second-degree murder. Jennings showed no visible reaction. He did not look at the judge or the jury. He sat perfectly still, his eyes on the table in front of him. Reeves watched from her seat near the aisle, her face expressionless. Ellison exhaled quietly, his hands clasped together. The sentence followed swiftly. 30 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 20. There was no applause, no outward relief. Just the quiet sound of the gavel, the shuffle of papers, the slow movement of officers preparing to escort Jennings away. As he stood, shackles faintly clinking, he turned his head toward the public gallery. There, seated in the second row, was Lisa Warner. She had attended every day of the trial, never missing a session, never speaking to the press. Her posture was calm, her expression unreadable. Jennings's eyes met hers for a brief, fleeting moment. There was no anger, no plea, no visible regret, only the hollow stare of a man who had finally been seen for what he was. Lisa did not move, did not speak, did not flinch. Then, as the deputies led him out through the side door, the courtroom fell into silence again, the kind that comes not from peace, but from the quiet understanding that justice, however late, had finally arrived. The farmhouse still stands at the edge of the gravel road, weathered and quiet. The white paint has peeled away in long strips, and the shutters hang loose in the wind. The yard is overgrown now, the garden fence leaning toward the earth it once protected. On the mailbox, the name Diana Holt remains in fading black letters, untouched, unchanged. Every April, Lisa Warner drives out from town and parks by the front gate. She brings a bundle of fresh flowers, usually wild daffodils or daisies from her own yard. She kneels, brushes away the dust from the post, and leaves them there in silence. No words, no ceremony. Just the quiet act of remembrance. Inside the Boone County Sheriff's Office, the cold case wall tells another story. Dozens of folders line the corkboard. Open cases, unsolved mysteries, unanswered questions. But one file now carries a single word written in red ink across its cover. Solved. Detective Carla Reeves placed it there herself. She did not speak when she pinned it, only stood for a moment and looked at the label. Around her, the hum of the office continued. Phones ringing, voices low, printers running, the ordinary rhythm of police work. But that single file, the one marked Holt, Diana, 1995, carried the weight of nearly 3 decades of waiting. For Reeves, it was more than a victory. It was proof of persistence, of science catching what time tried to bury. She often thought of Detective Mark Ellison, now retired, who had refused to let the case fade. His notes, his sketches, even his underlined comments in the margins had guided her through the investigation. Every page of that file was a bridge between the past and the present. In Boone County, life moved on. New families bought nearby land, children rode their bikes along the same gravel road, and the memory of Diana Holt became part of local history, retold in quiet voices at church picnics and school projects about unsolved crimes. Some remembered her as the woman with the sharp tongue and the kind heart. Others remembered only the mystery that surrounded her name. Yet the smallest details endured. A torn scrap of plaid fabric preserved in a sealed envelope, fingernail scrapings stored in a plastic vial, a coffee cup left half-finished on a kitchen table. Those fragments had survived the years, untouched, unseen, but waiting. When modern DNA technology reached them, they spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with certainty. In that whisper of science, truth emerged. For Lisa, closure came not through relief, but through understanding. She knew her aunt had been tough, proud, unyielding, the kind of woman who left a mark even in silence. Each April, when the wind moves through the hollow porch boards of the old farmhouse, it sounds almost like her voice. The community does not talk about Earl Jennings anymore. His name has already begun to fade again, this time for good. What remains is the echo of what Diana left behind. Resilience, memory, and the quiet justice that took 27 years to arrive. The gravel road still stretches past her gate, empty most days, but every so often, a passing driver slows down, glancing toward the faded house where a story once began. For 27 years, time kept its secret. Science finally spoke.